Okay, well, let's call the meeting to order. It's time for that. Anyway, 4:33. Thanks everybody for coming to this meeting. I see Melvin Edward just got on and Zeta, it looks like Zeta and LeVar are on. I'll introduce everybody in a second. This is the annual installment of our tax committee, which we pulled together for recommendations on the tax rate. And there's a kind of a four-step process to that. We'll go through that in a second. I'm just going to do some opening remarks and that kind of stuff, and then I'll pass it over to Patrick, who has the detail behind all this magic. So we have a committee of 5 people normally, and it's this year it's going to be 6. The members of the committee are Diana Zinel from the Springfield Chamber of Commerce. You can see Diana there. She's in the upper right. Patrick Greenhall, Chairman of the Board of Assessors. He's over there too, and he's in the picture there. Freddie Lopez, who we're hoping will show up. He's been on the committee for, I don't know, maybe 4 or 5 years in a row. He's been a great representative. Mark Howard from Springfield College, economist, economics professor. Another person we asked to join this year, Jay Latore, who's interested in it. He's very active citizen in and gets involved in a lot of different things. He's always shown some interest in the tax rates. And myself, Tim Allen, as chairman of the finance committee. There's 5 voting positions. We ultimately will recommend a tax rate. Jay will not be voting, and unless there's something changes, but he's going to be on. He's going to help us with the analysis, and maybe he's heading towards being on this in the future. Appreciate you joining in. Those are the people we're here. We got Pat Burns is here, Steve Lonergan, Kathy Bono from the finance team.
Jessica Guerra from Board of Assessors. Yeah, it's me. My hair is darker.
It's darker. You're here from assessors, right?
Yes.
And does everybody know everybody else on the screen? We have Diana, we have Lindsay from the finance team. Who's that beneath Lindsay? Is that
Delgado.
Is that Jose? Okay. Counselor Delgado, Counselor Click Bruce, Counselor Govan, and who's that above the Focus Springfield symbol? That's Counselor Sandell, my colleague, high school buddy. Classical 69, both of us. Anyway, thanks everybody for coming. Thank you guys who have volunteered to be on the committee and help us out with the challenging thing of trying to come up with a tax rate, which is suitable for everybody. Hard to do that. We don't usually have any potion to do that right, but the more people and the good involvement from the committee gets us closer to being able to do that as best we can. The 4-step process, when I said 4 steps, we have this meeting tonight. I'll be done talking in a couple of minutes, and I'll hand it over to Patrick. This next meeting is next Tuesday at 4:30, the 19th. That's again, this group of people going over and Patrick he'll tell you, he'll have more info. We don't have much info tonight. We haven't got approval from DOR yet, etc. So next Tuesday will be a, more complicated meeting than tonight. And then the following Monday and Tuesday, which is the Monday and Tuesday of Thanksgiving week, the 25th and 26th. Hopefully you won't need to meet on the 26th, but on the 25th, there'll be a council meeting to approve what comes out of here. So we'll meet again, and we'll come up with a recommendation. People will vote on it. That recommendation will go to the council, presumably that night. And then we'll meet if it doesn't get approved or we don't get anywhere with it, we'll have to do it again on Tuesday. We're not to that point yet, so we'll tell you a little more about that. Patrick is the guy with all the data about rates and values and all that sort of stuff. So appreciate everybody being here, but why don't I hand it over to Patrick? He's going to do a little presentation and we'll go from there. Thanks, Patrick. You ready to go?
I am. Thank you, Councilor Allen. So yes, my name is Patrick Greenhall. I am the chair of the Board of Assessors for the city of Springfield. And as Councilor Allen mentioned, tonight is just going to be a general sort of overview of information, sort of what is the role of this committee. We don't have final approvals yet from the Department of Revenue. So I'm unable to sort of provide the real detailed kind of penny rate sheets that a lot of you are used to. I would expect to have those available as early as Friday. So we can have a little more substantive conversation about sort of the tax impacts on our next scheduled meeting, which would be next Tuesday. But let me at least provide a little bit of background information about what our role is here with this committee. So I'm just going to share a screen and do a PowerPoint. Okay. So you should be seeing the fiscal 25 tax classification hearing. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So our the tax classification overview. So in short, the entire process begins with the city budget. So the city has to adopt a budget before July 1st, which sets the expenditures for the entire fiscal year. The fiscal 25 budget was adopted by the City Council on May 28th of 2024. The final levy is yet to be determined because we are waiting for the Department of Revenue to approve our values and our new growth. Here's where the City Council must determine, once that's done, the City Council must determine the percentage of the tax levy to be paid by each class, which would be residential class and then the commercial, industrial, and personal property class. The very last step, so even after the City Council has adopted a tax factor, we still need review from the Department of Revenue for certification of our factor and therefore our tax rates. And in order to generate timely tax bills, this has to occur before Wednesday, December 4th. Board of Assessors, our general role and responsibility is to determine what is called the full and fair cash value of all properties, which would include real estate and personal property in the city of Springfield. Now, full and fair cash value is defined as the price on which a willing seller and a willing buyer will agree upon if both are fully informed and under no compulsion. The city of Springfield, we have approximately 45,885 taxable parcels and personal property accounts, and these must be updated every single year to reflect the full and fair cash value. Our regulating agency is called the Department of Revenue, and they are responsible for certifying that our assessed values meet the full and fair cash value standard, and that we are in compliance with Proposition 2.5, which we'll talk about a little more later. The Department of Revenue requires certification once every 5 years from all municipalities, and Springfield's last valuation certification was done in fiscal 23. Now, in between those 5 years, there is something called an interim year valuation adjustment. So we are still required to update our values every year to reflect the standard of full and fair cash value. And we have to provide documentation to the Department of Revenue, including all of our sales and values, to ensure compliance with full and fair cash value. Some key assessment dates for fiscal 25. The fiscal year runs from July 1st of 2024 to June 30th of 2025. Our legal description and evaluation date is as of January 1st of 2024. And the physical status that is used to determine the value is based on June 30th, 2024.
Did you just say that one again, Patrick? That's always a.
Yeah, so that's a kind of a trickier one. So what we're looking at is if, let's say, there's new construction and it was finished in June, we would assess it at the full and fair cash value as what the status was, what the physical condition was as of June 30th, and basically move it as though that was fully completed as of January 1st. So we're looking at values as of January 1st, but whatever the physical status really was as of June 30th. The tax Tax Classification Committee. So this committee, the purpose of this committee is to provide a tax factor recommendation to the full city council. Now, the tax factor is ultimately what the city council must vote on to determine the amount of levy to be paid by each class of property. And that's really called a shift, and we'll talk about that a little bit later as well. And then it really determines the tax rates for the residential and the CIP, which is commercial, industrial, and personal property. Again, the factor determines the final tax rates. At this point, we do not have final approval yet for our 25 values or growth. So I don't have that information for tonight. This is the levy limit, and the levy ceiling. So this is essential for Proposition 2.5. So these are just how these terms are defined. So the levy is the revenue that is raised to partially fund the city's budget. The levy limit is oftentimes the maximum amount a community can raise or can levy. There is a built-in increase annually in the formula that adds 2.5% of the prior year's levy limit plus the new growth. That establishes the new levy limit, and we'll talk about those as they apply to fiscal 25 at the next meeting. The ultimate constraint is called the levy ceiling, and this is the maximum amount that the levy can ever be. And the amount is 2.5% of the overall assessed values for both real and personal property. This number does change every single year based on the valuations of our properties in Springfield.
So Patrick, excuse me, Freddie just walked in. I'm wondering if you can just, give a little overview of what you're doing, so he has a little background. on what
Thank
we're
you.
doing.
Yes, no problem. So Freddie, I know you've been on this committee a number of years. So what we're doing tonight is just a general brief overview because we are waiting approval from the Department of Revenue for our final numbers. Thus, I don't have the tax penny rate sheets that you're used to seeing. We'll have those as early as Friday, which I'll email to everyone. And that would certainly be our discussion for our next schedule next Tuesday.
Has the mayor's office made a recommendation already this year?
No, because we do
Okay.
not have the numbers certified yet from the Department of Revenue, so we haven't had that conversation with the mayor either.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Hey, Patrick, one quick question. You said the max is 2.5% over. What was that?
It's the overall total assessed value.
Right. So you said, but 2.5 is the max increase?
No, 2.5. So let me just briefly go over this quickly. So the levy is the amount that the city has raised in revenue to fund the city's budget.
Right.
Then there's another constraint in Proposition 2.5 called the levy limit, and which is oftentimes the maximum amount that the city can raise. And that formula looks at what was the levy limit in the prior year. You automatically add 2.5% to that prior year levy limit, plus you add any new growth. That becomes your new levy limit. And at the next meeting, I'll have this chart filled in with the fiscal 25 data so you can see it in real numbers.
Okay, thank you.
The final outside is the levy ceiling, and that is the maximum amount that can ever be levied, and that is 2.5% of the total values.
So
That change
if there's no growth, automatically they're still gonna most likely get 2.5% over last year.
That's correct.
Okay.
These is our total taxable value. So in fiscal 22, it was approximately 10 billion. In fiscal 23, there was a 12.78% increase to 11.2 billion. And again, for fiscal 24, the total value was 12.5 billion, and that was an 11.3% increase. And of course, I'll have fiscal 25 data for our next meeting.
So just to reiterate that, so those are double-digit increases from year to year on total value
That's right.
of the properties in the city.
Yes.
Is that price? Is price in there or?
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Yeah.
I guess it is. I'm just,
Their value is basically, the way that they do their value now is the same way that we do market value in real estate is before it used to be assessed value was a lot less than market value. And now the assessed value is based pretty much on the market value.
That's true. That's state law for all of Massachusetts. That is absolutely correct. So we have to look at what is called the full and fair cash value to determine the values of all properties.
What was that term again, Patrick?
Full and fair cash value.
Full and fair cash value. Got it.
That is our legal standard. These two charts represent the shift. So this is the amount of the tax levy that would have been paid by the residential if we were taxed at a single tax rate. I think another way to say that is this is looking at the total value, and the residential portion of the total value for all of the city of Springfield is 77.55%. But what the law allows us to do is actually shift some of this tax burden from the residential class and put it onto the commercial, industrial, and personal property class. So this is the fiscal 24 end result of the shift. So again, the original value, residential makes up 77.55% of the total value, but who actually paid the levy? The residential portion paid 61% of the levy. Now, conversely, commercial, industrial, and personal property, they represent 22.45% of the overall value, but we shifted onto them 38.97% of the levy, of the tax. So these two charts just kind of show you when we are looking at the tax factors and the shift, this is what we're changing this pie.
Do we have those broken down by commercial, personal? What was the third one?
Industrial.
Industrial, yeah. Do we have those broken down? Because I think that a lot of times, some people think it's just commercial and industrial.
Not on this chart, but I can definitely provide that information, particularly in our next meeting, and I can include the fiscal 25.
Yeah, I think it's important to separate the you said personal?
Yes, personal property.
So personal property taxes is considered in this real estate taxes?
That's correct.
So where do we make that public that everybody knows? Because I think this is, I mean, I've heard it before, but this is, that's why I said I think those numbers are important, because if we're talking real estate here, personal property is not considered real estate. But if we're including that in this basis, I think it should be broken out as to how.
So I think part of maybe if we went back to some of the earlier slides, part of the requirement is for us to determine all taxable parcels, which would include real estate and personal property. So
what would be an example of personal property that's a taxable parcel? Because the definition of real estate is property that's been improved on land, basically, or land with improvements on it. So what would be personal property that's considered real estate?
it's not considered real estate. It's personal property and taxed as personal property.
So then why is it included in the real estate tax classification?
Because they get taxed at the commercial tax rate.
I know, I understand all of that, but shouldn't we spell out that, because I mean, when you're labeling it all real estate and it does not fall under the definition of real estate, literally technical terms, the term real estate does not include personal property. As a real estate broker, that is the clear definition of what we work on. So this all says real estate, real estate, real estate. I think it should be very clear on the personal part of it.
I appreciate that, and I can definitely make that clear, but just to note on the pie chart, it's commercial, industrial, and personal property. It actually, it doesn't say real estate.
I guess I'm more talking about the process and the system of it, and you're talking about the specifics of where we are now. So I understand. We can just move on from that.
Okay.
That's one question.
Yeah, Jay?
Patrick, I liked Freddie's question. Could you give a couple of examples of personal property that's taxable?
So personal property is relatively complicated. And it is based on the type.
Computers are taxed. I pay personal tax when you come into my office and you give me an assessment based on what's inside my office. So I pay you for my computers in my office. But I just didn't know it was included in a real estate classification.
It's not a real estate classification. So there's separate categories. So Board of Assessors, all of us in Massachusetts, we are charged with classifying property into their use types. So you have residential class, is it residential, a single family, two family, condo, those all get a class code that starts with a 1. You have commercial properties. Those are all that start with a 300. 400 is industrial, and 500 class codes are personal property. So it's not lumped in as real estate, but because they are taxed at the commercial tax rate, which is why they're lumped together as CIP.
Yeah, so I think maybe we should update to say special finance real estate and personal tax classification, real estate and personal tax ratio committee. Because I don't see any mention of personal anywhere, and I think it's two different things, and you're just lumping them up into one. But again, that's the process, that has been the process. I'm just saying, just identifying that the process has flaws.
Understood.
Well, then, could we have another example of personal property? Is it just the computers? What are other examples of personal
The
property?
table, the chairs,
So,
Like machinery. in a
anything that's
factory?
not real estate.
Okay,
But it's classified, I'm just saying that it's just thrown in here, like in Congress when they throw different things in the middle, and I'm just saying it's not really clear. And I'm not saying anybody's done anything wrong, I just think it should be clear that, I don't think even when we have the counselors in there, that we ever talk about that this includes personal property.
so this is, again, this would be stuff that's in the building. It wouldn't include
The
like a
building,
car,
it would include the building, anything but the building.
anything but the building.
Right.
What about don't we include electric lines and electric poles and things like that?
That's true. Yes. So Eversource, yes, our utilities, they are frankly our largest taxpayers, and that is from their personal property.
And so you'll provide us with the split on that? What percentage, for instance, is personal property? What percentage is commercial? What percentage is industrial?
Certainly, yes.
That'd be great.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Right.
This next chart, which includes commercial, industrial, and personal property, which shows the shift. So our max shift for the city of Springfield is 1.75%. So we can see here we have slowly crept up. So we're shifting more and more of the tax burden from the residential to the commercial industrial class. So we'll have this information on the penny tax rate sheet for our next meeting as well. We'll show you what the tax options are and what that would mean for the shift. This is our average single family value from 21 to 24. You'll see that last year's average value was $238,700.
So that's
This
been
is-
going up significantly every year. I remember it was 126 or 138 or something. So what would it have been the year before? It was 238.
So 215,700 was 2023.
15.
And then in 2022, it was 185,100. And in fiscal 21, it was 172,900.
Yeah, according to US News, we were the 7th real estate market in the entire nation for growth, and they had assumed we had grown like 25% a year for 3 years in a row. So question, when you come to these valuations and you have a date on there that says like, on this year, et cetera, is this all properties are assessed at the exact same time on the exact same day? Or is this throughout the year we've had different assessments, et cetera?
Yeah, good question. So we, board, assessors in Massachusetts, we are required to look at the legal valuation date as January 1st of 2024.
Mhm.
Now, what's interesting though, is it's the physical status is based on June 30th. So it was really what was there. If it was something that was being renovated or newly constructed, it's really what was there on June 30th. And we take basically a snapshot of what was there, and we look at the comparable sales and sort of what was happening in the market as of January 1st of 2024. So it is just one date.
Okay.
Now, anytime I have an opportunity to talk about personal exemptions, I'm going to, sort of take that. So this really isn't necessarily related to this committee, but I would just want to put out there that we do have some personal exemptions, which include the following. So a 41C, these are just the statutory references. Someone who is over the age of 65 can receive a $1,000 reduction in their taxes. Now, there are income and asset restrictions. So if someone's married and both parties earn Social Security, it would be 42,667 is the max income. I would note that the mayor and the city council, they did lower the age in fiscal 23. So you prior to 2023, you had to have been 70. We lowered that to 65, and we also increased the exemption amount from 500 to 1,000. The next one is called a 17D, and it's for either someone who's over the age of 70 or a surviving spouse. There's a maximum asset limitation of $40,000, and that exemption amount is 175. There's an exemption for homeowners who are blind. That exemption is $437.50. Veterans, this exemption amount ranges based on one's disability rating. So a disabled veteran or their spouse, if it's disability rating of 10% or more, could qualify for an exemption between $400 and a full exemption. And something really related to the state is called the circuit breaker tax credit. You have to be over the age of 65, and really what the formula comes down to is if you are over the age of 65 and your entire real estate tax bill and 50% of your water and sewer bill is greater than 10% of your income, then someone could be eligible for a refund from the state of Massachusetts. And lastly, we have some proposed targeted tax relief. Now, these really wouldn't go into effect until fiscal 26 for next year. One of them was a HEROES Act, and this allowed for a local acceptance statute where the city could essentially double the tax exemptions for qualifying veterans. So our two biggest veteran programs, one would be for $400, another is $1,000. Those could go to $800 and $2,000. This will be something that we will bring to the city council fairly shortly. The next two will be part of the tax classification hearing vote. One of them is a donation statute. It actually creates a fund that is supported by donations, and it would allow for a taxation aid committee to define elderly, disabled, and low income. And once that is defined, those people could be eligible for a tax reduction. The fund, again, is completely funded by donations. So this tax rate committee, they can send out as part of a tax bill or excise bill or a separate mailing. Or there's a pilot committee that could be linked into this statute as well. The second component to this is the mayor's willing to commit to putting in $1 million. However, we need to do a home rule petition first. The reason why is because the statute does not allow the city to appropriate funds into this account. So this home rule petition would basically seek permission to allow us to appropriate money into that fund. That is the presentation for tonight. Again, just as a reminder, the role of this committee is to recommend a tax factor to be adopted by the city council. The classification hearing is scheduled for Monday, November 25th. The tax factor ultimately determines the levy to be paid by each class, the residential class and the commercial, industrial, and personal property class. And once the Department of Revenue certifies our values and new growth, we will send out the tax rate options to this committee and all of the city councilors prior to our next meeting. And our next meeting for the tax committee will be Tuesday, November 19th. Are there any other questions for tonight?
I have one, Patrick, and that is have you emailed this presentation around, or
I have not yet, no, but I certainly
do
can.
you plan to, or a request that you would email it around to
Sure.
all of us, so we have this info at hand? Is that a problem?
No, I can absolutely send it out.
Okay, and is there any other info besides this presentation that would help us as we come to next meeting next Tuesday?
No, it's critical that we obtain approval before I provide any additional information.
Okay, Mark Howard has a question.
How much did the budget go up by? What was the percentage?
Could you stop sharing so we could see everybody? I can't.
Sure. There it is.
Thanks.
Okay. I don't have the budget information readily.
What did the budget come up?
Like nine, maybe something like that.
I mean, it's hard to quantify it that way because the school budget
School budget went up
goes up
substantially.
much larger.
I
than
mean,
the
if when
city
we took
budget,
out
I
everything.
believe chapter 70, which is our main funding source for the school department, went up 6%.
But that's more than half of the budget, right?
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
So the school department, do you remember what the school department budget was, or the city
I
side?
can share those numbers if you want.
Yeah,
Oh,
great.
Thank you.
So the city side budget went up 3.9% over FY '24. And the school department went up 6.7%. The overall total budget, which for fiscal '25 is 928.7 million, went up 5.8% over FY '24.
928, and that was what, 5% higher than the previous?
5.8%.
5.8.
Do you guys have, and I know that's more of a budget question, but do you guys have, out of that 5.8%, how much your actual funding has increased for that? To cover that 5.8, or are you guys expecting to cover that all from tax revenue?
No, that's definitely
Additional funding.
yeah, so that's definite because that would be a variance of $50.8 million. And that's definitely a mix of state aid, tax levy, other revenue sources.
60% of our revenues are state aid.
Yep.
We're very dependent on the state.
So what we're trying to make up for, as far as the reason why, and I know you brought up the budget, and we've been tortured with this same conversation over and over and over because it ties so much to the budget. And my question was all of this discussed during budget review? Because I'm not part of the budget review committee. We come in for the tax review, and you know, we know how much it's tied to the budget. So I guess we want to know, like, how much of the budget, because of increases, do we have to make up for as far as raising the tax levy? How much more funding are we increasing due to that? And then was that taken into consideration during budget review? And have the counselors, when we meet with them to discuss all of this, these are the questions they're gonna have, and it's the exact same questions, so I guess try not to repeat the Groundhog Day again. I just wanna know if they all promised us that they would have this discussion during budget review, and I just wanted to know if it was something that was discussed.
Yes, I mean,
It
the
was-
counselors did discuss and did know when they passed the budget, the tax rate is gonna be reflected on the increase in the budget.
Okay.
So
So-
they did have that.
All right, so I don't know if you guys can give us how much of it you guys got additional funding for versus how much of it we have to make up for the budget from tax collection. So I don't know if you guys can break that down into a simple format for us to be able to review that.
Yeah, I think I'd like to just make a comment that what we are charged with, this tax rate committee, is determining the share of the levy that is borne by the commercial, industrial, personal property, and residential. It's not a total budget review. It's we're presenting, the city council has to adopt a factor to fund the levy. So, and that levy is based on a 2.5% increase from the prior year's levy plus new growth. So that's what we're here to discuss. So I appreciate that you want to know kind of the bigger budget component, and that's certainly a very important part. But our role in this committee is to recommend a factor for the levy.
Yeah, I understand that, Patrick. I think the problem is that that's what we set out to do, and then the whole conversation in the other room becomes a whole budget conversation. So I think to understand, from our point of view, to understand how we want to, determine the shift in the responsibility of the taxes, then I think we want to know how much of it is due to increased budget.
Well, I can't speak to the entire budget, but I can certainly say that the levy increase is going to be based on the proposition 2.5, so 2.5% increase of last year's levy limit plus new growth. That is what this tax factor would be funding.
So I just have another question there with that regard. Suppose your share, the city's share of the budget increase amounted to a 5% increase. But suppose the growth plus the 2.5% amounted to a levy increase of, say, 10% or even more, assuming that property values have gone up again by 12%. But the point is that the increase in the levy is substantially greater in percentage terms in that case than the increase in the budget. And I
Right.
think that's what you're.
Yeah,
getting
we
at.
just want to make that clear to everybody, is that we have enough to cover the budget, but we're still going to be asking for more money than that. And we want to make that very clear. Because I think that is a piece that, people just need to understand.
Excuse me, Freddie, what do you mean by we have enough to cover the budget, but we're asking for more?
So what I'm asking is, so let's say you got some increased funding, but you also had an increase in the budget. So how much of a difference was not covered by increased funding? That's kind of like what we want to know.
Right. So definitely in order to bring the balanced budget to the city council, we have to take into consideration all the revenue sources, which net zero of the total budget cost. So all revenue sources, state aid, levy, everything included equals exactly our total budget.
No, I understand that. This is my 7th year here. So what I'm saying is, I'm gonna ask the same question again, because I don't think it's a confusing question. So if the budget went up 5.8% and then your funding went up, what percentage of funding is gonna cover that 5.8%? And how much of a gap do we have from that?
I think what we're looking at is, we took last year's levy, added 2.5% onto that, which is quick math,
Yeah, I just
like
wanna-
$6 million. So we use $6 million in new taxes to balance the budget. So now we have to find that and shift.
Yeah,
it between.
does the $6 million cover that, is what I'm asking,
Yes,
fully?
that's how we balance
We
the
have to
budget.
pay- yeah.
We were dependent on that $6 million to
And-
balance the budget.
And so the
That's not
5.8,
including the new growth.
so it's about 5.8 increase, right, overall, is what you're saying, it's
The
about?
budget increased 5.8, but
Yes,
that,
so the budget increased by the amount of the max levy, basically based on what you had.
the
It
problem.
just always works out that way conveniently, so I'm trying to ask for the details.
What we do is we start off with a budget request and we're out of balance like $30 million. So
Right.
basically, the expenditure requests exceed our revenue estimates by $30 million.
Right.
And then we work down to get that to zero. But we're taking last year's levy, we're adding 2.5% onto that, and then we're estimating new growth on top of that.
So we're charged with, and the city councils ask us, well, how can we give the residents relief? You can't if they keep increasing the budget.
Right, but
Okay.
what we've been doing is we've been using what we call free cash to kind of control
Yeah, to
the
get rid of it,
increase.
yeah.
I mean, it's still going up, but it's not going up as much.
No, I know. I think it's more of those who don't understand how it works. They ask a very simple question is how can we give them relief? You can't unless you reduce the budget. It's
You
the same
reduce the-
answer every year.
Right,
Okay.
but unfortunately, the way the budget's built, there's a lot of fixed costs that
Right.
the council can't reduce.
Yeah, exactly.
The big one being education, and that's mandated by the state, and that would jeopardize our largest funding source. And unfortunately, with that Chapter 70 state aid comes another component that's a net school spending contribution that the city has to make in order to ensure that we get our $500 million in education aid. So we're kind of behind the eight ball to start.
Yeah.
So that when the council's looking to cut the budget, they can only look in certain areas, and those areas are.
I'm just hoping we don't spend 3 days on
Yeah.
that conversation again.
I've
like we do
spent
every
31
year.
years on it, so.
Yeah,
believe me, I know.
okay. That's why I'm asking these clarifying questions. Some of it is not only just for me.
I
So,
know.
31 years, Pat?
Yes, and I have.
And then Freddie, 7 years on this?
mhm.
I mean, it's a valid question when we're going through, and if we had cut $5 million more out of the budget, what impact would it have had on this?
But again, the things, especially what were the two hugest increases? School transportation went up substantially, and we have nothing we can do about that. And the pension liability that goes up every year. Those were two of the big increases.
Insurance was a big cost.
Insurance went up,
Oh.
yes.
Let's say we had gone into OTPS and cut $3 million out of that salaries kind of stuff. What impact would that have on this? Would it be a clear $3 million less we'd have to raise, or?
In a perfect world, it would
Yeah.
work that way, but it doesn't.
Because of the other,
Well, then we go to the Department of Revenue, or there's needs that come up. And the Department of Revenue is gonna scrutinize our local receipts, which is only 10% of our budget, but they could say these estimates are way too high. And what they call is, they say, you need to raise this. By raising it, they mean raise it in taxation. So if you were to cut $2 million, it might not translate into a $2 million reduction in the levy. It might translate into a $1 million reduction, but unfortunately, and we've all been through this, the budget's done in June, and this process is done generally the end of November. And the last piece of the whole process is the Department of Revenue, and not looking at values. Now they're looking at our budget, basically looking at the revenue side. The expenditure side, we list all the votes of everything the council's done to put the money in the department's budget to spend. Now they're saying, prove to us that this budget's in balance. And they want that to be done in a conservative way. And when I say that, they look at what you had in revenue historically, and if they see a huge bump up, they're not gonna allow that. Or if they see a small bump up, they're probably not gonna allow it. They want you to be conservative, so you don't end the year in a negative deficit. And
So there's a lot of guessing at the beginning to try to see and kind of gauging, and I get it.
right, and then the last piece is, the assessors don't have values determined till now. And the budget's
That's the
done
big
in June, so. And I mean, other communities around us, they're like flipped, whereas 70% of their budget is from tax revenue. And they get a small amount in state aid. We're the exact opposite, and we're kind of at the mercy of the state. So if times are bad economically, then the state could, what we call level fund our state aid, which is basically, they just give us the same amount as the year before. And as we all know, on the education side, teachers are gonna get raises, transportation's gonna increase, health insurance is gonna increase. So we then have to come up with that amount, and it has a multiplying effect because our budget is 60% education, so. You know, that's, Springfield's in that situation, Holyoke's in that situation, Chicopee to a lesser extent. But some of the smaller communities, they're the opposite way. So if they get a cut in state aid, it hurts, but to us, it's devastating.
Yeah, I serve on the board of Springfield International Charter School. We do Title IX and everything else, so it's a little different.
Yeah.
Question on the if we have no new growth, which means the market goes stale, so property values do not increase, so you can't add that new growth. You're still gonna add that 2.5% to the levy every year. And so let's say property values decrease, you're still gonna add that 2.5%. Hypothetically, if we go into a stale market or in a decreasing market, the homeowners are gonna have to, and the property owners are going to have to make up the difference with that budget, or we would have to go into severe budget cuts at some point.
And
Okay.
that's where Patrick can speak to it much better than me. That's where you come into hitting your levy ceiling.
Correct.
And then all of a sudden, you can't raise that
You can't
money
raise it, right.
anymore. So
The-
your state aid's getting cut. Now you can't go to real estate because you've hit your levy limit, so you just have to cut. And that, we've been in that situation. Thankfully, not in a long time,
Right.
but we have been where it's a double prong. So your state aid's going down and now, all right, well, let's make up for it with real estate, but we have no room to raise any more tax.
Yeah,
dollars.
we've been very lucky that we've had a lot of new growth that allows that to happen, but when that new growth starts going away, hopefully it doesn't. But realistically speaking, it might level out a little bit. I think, you guys should have some plans on.
That's why we have reserves
Yeah,
that we need to keep.
right.
So when the one thing that comes out of hitting your levy ceiling is people's tax bills don't go up because you can't,
You can't.
because your levy's staying the same. So,
So you either cut budgets or you go into the reserves.
Right.
Got it.
or both.
Or both, right?
That's-
Or fundraise somehow, some way, or whatever it is.
Right.
Yeah, got it. Hopefully. I heard it. It's hard. It's not that simple. Yeah, got it.
Brady's been at this for a few years. Well, huh?
Good, but it's catch-22, you
Right.
know.
Well, that's why I'm saying, you guys have a very challenging job, and I
We have
think
to put it
that,
all together during the budget process, and then it comes down to this, but you only have so many funding sources, you can only come up. DOR watches everything, we can't put in, estimated revenue is a lot higher, so we look at the past 3 years and historically, and we put them in. And they wanted us to be as conservative as possible.
Yep.
And then they look at the expenditures to make sure that we're not cutting even, and knowing that we're gonna have to put that money back during the year, so. And so much, the counselors know so much of our budget is fixed.
yeah, you guys know a lot of technical terms, and you guys know the process a lot different than, let's say, the average taxpayer in the city, so that's why I ask these clarifying questions where they're looking at it from, why is my tax bill going up, if this and that, and there's so many factors to it that I wish there was like a video game to it. Now raise the tax levy and the value goes down, and you guys can see how it really,
Yeah.
you guys see it, I see it, I'm sure you see it, but for them to see it, it would be great. Because I think there's a big miscommunication on how that works, and my only fear is, just watching the market is 25% growth, 25% growth, 25% growth. Where'd the growth go? Now what? Gotta be careful with that, that's all it is, so.
Mark, you got something?
No, somebody has a
Councilor
hand
Gavon
raised.
does.
Somebody get their hand up. All right.
Councilor Gavon.
Go ahead, Counselor Govan, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I thank you, Patrick, for this presentation, and for all the conversations we've had over the last couple of years and even today. So what Freddie was talking about, when we talked about the budget back in, I think, the spring, that's one of the questions that I talked about. I asked was, how could we decrease the budget, right? Because we learned that there are some departments in the city that have vacancies that are being funded. So because those vacancies are being funded, they're included in the budget. So why don't we take those positions out so that the budget is decreased, so we don't have to raise as many taxes as we have been? Because like I told everyone today, I get calls, probably just like Freddie does, of constituents that are asking me about their property taxes and why are they so high and how can they get some relief, right? So I really am interested in how we can do that. I've talked about it since I've come on the council 4 years ago. And I'm going to continue to talk about it because that's what my constituents are calling me about. So that is something that I brought up during the budget season. And it didn't really go anywhere. But I'll continue to work on that. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Those are good questions, and I mean, this is maybe the best discussion we've had on this in this committee in a few years. I don't know if there's some what ifs we could do or something. Obviously, we'll somehow get through this, and we won't like what we have to recommend. It'll be higher. But maybe the leftover out of that or the takeaway out of that will be that we have a more robust budget process kind of thing where we really look at, because we've done, I mean, there were times, I think we did it this year. The compromise for us when we approved the budget was, I think I went to you guys, we had 15, was it 15 or 17 open positions we took out of the budget?
We're working on it now, we're taking those throughout the year.
Yeah, so that was how we leveled the budget, but there have been times when there's, I don't know, I may be exaggerating a little, but there's lots of open positions, 60 or 80 or 100 or whatever. And the question is, how much of that can we reduce and not without layoffs and stuff? That's a question we've been dealing with that for years. We always come to some compromise on it, but it maybe doesn't ever affect, it's never big enough to really affect the budget in a really big way. I mean, that's my perspective on it, but it will come up again. Zeta, you brought it up. I mean, I remember 4 or 5 years ago, I made 18 calls to every counselor because I was recommending open positions be eliminated. And everybody agreed, so we got into the budget because it didn't have a terrible impact on anybody. But we were at least taking the expense out of the budget. So we just got to remember this conversation because when we leave them all in there, we end up with a higher tax bill than we want. And so
We do lower the budget by 1.5 million once we do it, because we do acknowledge open positions. We do fund positions that we know are gonna take a longer time to fill, for only 6 months or 9 months. But there is turnover. You know how the departments are struggling to fill positions. We're losing people to the state all the time. And there are positions we need. There, fire or safety positions that we can't cut, and so it's not as easy as saying, okay, it's not filled, let's just take it. There's health department positions that are open that are necessary and needed. And so it's not as easy as saying, okay, if no one's in this position on July 1st, we're taking the money. It's not that simple. But every year we increase that number. So we got the total budget, we decreased it by 1.5 million that we have to make up with all the
Like your variance, basically.
yeah, all the open positions. And this year, we're settling with a lot of unions. So a lot of those open position vacancies are gonna cover the cost for the union, once we settle with the unions on the retro, and some of the unions are getting signing bonuses that are good because they're non-pensionable and they're one time. So a lot of the vacancies this year, we will use that money to offset so that I may not have to go in front of you for more free cash to come to that. So it's not as simple as saying, okay, every open position right now, let's cut it out of the budget. If it was that simple, we would have done it. We could do it. So it is something we absolutely will look at, and we spend, and Lindsay will tell you, and Pat, when we sit around, and Steve, when we sit around doing the budget, we look at every department, we look at how long it's been open, how many, so it is an exercise we go through for every department.
yeah, Jay.
Thank you, Counselor. Just a couple of comments here. I like what you said, Freddie, because it is true that the average resident, average homeowner, really doesn't understand the process. The other thing I think it's important to say for those that might be listening is there's another set of residents that try to understand the process, but their common misconception is Proposition 2.5 keeps their individual property taxes from increasing by more than 2.5% every year, which is not how it works, but that's a common misconception that frustrates people. The other thing I just wanted to mention, and it's very good to hear you say this, is, in addition to, cutting the budget as a means to providing some relief, there's also trying to get what I'll phrase is get 100 pennies out of every dollar, really, really stretch every investment that we make to the maximum. And then as, someone alluded to, new revenue, right? The pilot committee and other things. I think it has to be a whole of government approach. Every department's got to be thinking about, if there are new revenue opportunities, how to take advantage of them. So, I'm glad that's being looked at and other things. Patrick, I just have one or two questions for you. Make sure I get the terms right here, so don't be afraid to correct me. The tax ratio limit of 1.75%, how much we can push towards commercial. If we ever get to that point, we're not stuck there, right? So if the circumstances change next year and we could shift it back a little bit for some reason, we could do that, right?
Yeah.
That's correct. So that's an annual determination. So the
Okay.
city, they're the ones that.
It just so kind of happens that, we talked previously about Boston, Boston's been there for a long time. It's kind of a policy choice, not so much as they got there once and now they have to stay there as a rule, correct?
Yes.
Okay, and then just another technical question. I understand completely how you make adjustments, to how much you can raise by new growth and then the 2.5%, minimum over the previous analysis. Freddie brought up a lot of good points, what happens if there's no new growth. I'm curious, does the process take into account, I guess what I would call like the opposite of new growth? So say, for example, there's I'm gonna use an example that makes sense to me. The Friendlies on Summer Avenue, right? That was previously a commercial property, taxed at a commercial rate, and then the city acquired the property. And now, it's a school department building and it's not taxed at all. It could have been acquired though by like a nonprofit and then it wouldn't have been taxed by that. Does the formula take into account those situations where we had a taxable property, and now it's no longer taxable and it provides you some sort of relief, it doesn't?
No, so essentially when something comes off the tax rolls, that's it. It's no longer
Yeah.
in the levy.
Okay.
So it just sort of falls off. And that's where the kind of the importance of that pilot committee that I know you're heavily involved with really comes into play, because as parcels come off of the tax rolls, we just lose that levy when it happens.
Okay.
So let's compare two recent properties. Jay just brought up the Friendlies on Sumner. We talked about that. The Stop and Shop, Super Stop and Shop on Cooley Street just closed. They announced like 3 months ago they were gonna close. And they're closed now. So there's a big Y across the street that's still going and thriving. But that Cooley Street property that was a Stop and Shop, that's still still taxed at the corporate rate until something else happens with it.
That's right. So we build into our modeling for commercial properties. They're generally going to be valued at something called the income approach to value. So we are looking at like, what is a typical rent that one could achieve in that space? So it's not specific to Stop and Shop. It'd be just a sort of general grocery store kind of rate. So they're still going to be taxed at a similar value. Now, the Friendlies, on the other hand, that coming off the tax rolls, that's it. So if a charitable organization, let's say, acquires something in the middle of the fiscal year, it's taxable for the remainder of that year. But that subsequent, as of that July 1st, if they own it and they apply for an exemption, it would become exempt.
Okay.
Just one follow-up to Counselor Allen's point, Patrick. Let's just say hypothetically, the Stop and Shop is closed, and let's say on July 1st, 2025, it's still closed. Its last use was a grocery store, but now it's been empty for what would that be? About 8 months. And there's nothing in there but like a couple of empty shelves. and some lights. Would that change how that overall parcel might be assessed?
Certainly, potentially, we would have to look at kind of marketing materials. Did it sell? Is it currently leased? What are they doing with this space? Would they be subdividing it for any type of other use? So those are all questions, good questions. We don't know the answer to at the moment.
Right.
And that's where that June 30th date is. We look at what's happening as of that June 30th. So in this case, it'd be June 30th of 2025 for next year.
So so been in commercial real estate 14 years, you know, with any ad Plotkin, I worked with them 12 years. And when you said the income approach is what let's say an appraisal will use. But you're saying when Jay asked, he said, well, what if the building is not in use? You said the income approach. So I don't think you reduce, like, let's say that's a 20,000 square foot property. I don't think if the income approach is, let's say, $15 a square foot per year, and then it's 0 per square foot per year, I don't think you reduce taxes based on that income approach, right? And also, do you use a future pro forma? So if a building is vacant and using the income approach, are you saying, well, what you just said, I heard you say, is well, what would it rent for? So you base taxes on future pro formas of what like its highest and greatest value could be? And that's what they're taxed on. I guess I just don't understand the income approach when it comes to commercial properties based on vacancy, not vacancy, what the market would be, et cetera. I mean, your formula sounds kind of like our formula, except I don't see where you would be able to get those guidelines to go off of, to base it off. So I don't, you know, he said there's a lot of formulas and this and that, but I mean, very specifically, he mentioned Stop and Shop if it's vacant, and then it's vacant again, you said, what it could rent for. And I guess at what point does it shift? And what is your process? And can you give us an example when it has shifted and you have decreased taxes in a situation like that?
Yeah, so that's a good question. So what we do is we have a statute that allows us to ask all commercial property owners to provide their income and expense data. It's called 38D. And that is extremely sensitive information. So none of that becomes public. But what we use it for is to determine our commercial modeling. So, right, so just because one particular, we'll use an apartment as an example. So just because one particular apartment, maybe they're charging less than market rent, but maybe that owner is choosing to pay less than market, charge less than market rent, we're still assessing them at the market rent. And the reason why is because we have to comply with that full and fair cash value standard. So that's where we do market research. We send out 38D information. We get all of that back from all the property owners, and we have to compile market models to say, okay, what is a typical, you know, bank going to rent for? What is a typical 1-bedroom or 2-bedroom, 3-bedroom apartment, or a restaurant, things like that. So that is all market-based, income-based assessed value.
And do you have an example on when you have reduced taxes for a business that is no longer producing the income that it should be producing, since you guys go off the income approach?
It's not about the individual. So just because one business says I'm earning less than what the market shows, the question there is, well, why are they earning less? Are we describing the property correctly? You know, do we have it in as
A
good?
vacant property. I mean,
Right,
they're
no,
earning 0. Let's say they're earning 0 and it's vacant.
Okay, so I'll kind of flip the question to you then, being in this business. So if you were to go and sell the property, how do you market it?
So if we were to sell a property that's vacant has a lot less value than someone who has a 10-year lease on there, way less value. I mean, it's like a fire sale. It's like pennies on a dollar. Versus if Home Depot leaves right now and they give you that building, I can get you that for pennies on a dollar. If Home Depot signs a 20-year lease, you're paying millions more. So how do you, based on the income approach, tax those differently? And I'd like to see an example of when you've given that relief to a business that has gone out of business in that way.
So we would have to, I don't have one off the top of my head.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
But maybe that's something we can pick
Yeah.
up next week.
Sure.
Been great discussions here. I just want to ask Diana from the chamber, you haven't had a chance to cut in. I don't know if you have any questions or us or some, or concerns that you want to express.
No, not specifically. I think these are all excellent questions. And you know, I understand this process just because of my work as an elected in my hometown. So don't have a lot of questions. You've done a great job of explaining everything and of answering everybody's questions. So I appreciate being here. I do want to say that I'm only going to be able to partially participate next week. So I think we start at 4:30 on Tuesday. Is that right?
That's the plan, yeah.
And then I have a select board meeting in, you know, chair of the select board in my hometown that starts at 5:30. And I have to be there. I can't not be
Would,
there.
would it make,
So,
would it make it easier for you if we started earlier?
well, yes, but I wouldn't want to ask for, you know, special treatment like that. I don't know if it would cause then problems for maybe other people on the
So if we
committee.
started, assuming we can do it, okay, legally and all that jazz, with notification. Would anybody object to starting, say, at 3:30 that day,
Tuesday.
Tuesday?
That would be really wonderfully accommodating.
Jay,
That would work
Freddie,
for me.
Mark, I can do it, Patrick, can you do it?
Yes.
Susan? Would there be any problem if we started that meeting notification wise?
Monday, the 25th?
No, the 19th meeting to
Oh, yeah.
start
That's
at,
what I'm talking about.
start at 3:30,
You're just gonna change that one, you're not changing the 25th.
not changing the
right?
25th.
Yeah.
So Tuesday, the 19th at 3:30. We'll do
That is amazing and thank you very much.
Yeah, well, we want you here, so.
I got one last question real quick,
Okay.
and it might be for Pat. Back taxes, so let's say this year you have a billable amount, so we talk about a collection amount, but it's really billable because you don't collect 100% of the money. You probably collect a percentage of it, right? So all of the taxes that were back taxes that were part of another year's maximum amount, collectible amount, and let's say a percentage of that, you guys are not receiving that money. If you collected money that was billable from prior years, does that affect the collectible amount for this year?
What we do is we base it on 100% collection, which is unrealistic.
Mhm.
And what makes up the 2%, like, let's say we collect 98%, we make that up with prior year real estate and also liens, tax liens that we put on property.
So you can't collect, so it is based on collection. So you can't collect more money than 100% this year, even though, let's say 20% is owed from last year, you can't go legally to 120?
No, we could.
Okay, that's what I'm,
That
okay.
flows into,
So is there any incentives like the state just did, like the amnesty program? Did you see the amnesty program with the state of Massachusetts? Where they say, have you guys ever done anything to try to, for collection purposes, to say you guys owe us this much, if you pay us this much now, we'll discount this, or any type of?
in my career, I remember us doing it for parking tickets
Mhm.
a long time ago. But I don't ever remember a tax amnesty program. I don't know, Steve, if you have any.
It came up a bunch of years ago when I first started as treasurer. And it was only for personal property because there's collection mechanisms in place for real and motor vehicle, for
Mhm.
example. And it didn't meet with a lot of success, I don't think. With the real estate, it was always, you put a lien on the property, at that time, the interest rate was higher. And they usually came in and paid at that point.
I'm just thinking if it's money that you know it's gonna be very tough to collect or whatever, maybe some type of incentive program and.
We are governed the law, and the biggest incentive would be eliminate the interest.
Right,
We can't do that once it hits 15.
which is what the state just did. The
Yeah,
state
they
is-
did for theirs.
Yeah.
They did, then you can look at it, but right now, I'm
Yeah, a
governed
whole
by
bigger entity of course.
taxes or fees, once they hit $15, which once you have a demand fee, you pass that. You can't waive anything, so when
Got it.
it's that point, it becomes illegal, so.
Got it. Thank you.
All right, everybody, great discussion. Hopefully, does anybody have any questions that didn't get answered? I'm hoping not, but, so it's, 5:42, so an hour and 10 minutes we spent here. Good discussion, good questions all the way around. Appreciate it. Glad you got here, Freddie. It was great to have you involved as usual. And everybody, we had everybody from the committee here. So Patrick, what can we expect from you? In terms of the presentation being sent around or the penny sheet?
Yeah, I can send out what was presented tonight. And then once the Department of Revenue certifies our values and growth, I will prepare the tax rate penny sheets and distribute those. So they will be in advance of our meeting next week.
Okay. Great. So we'll get that in our email. And we'll
Yes,
see. And the 3:30 Tuesday is all right with you?
yes.
Okay. Great. Thanks,
I appre-
everybody. Good
I
start.
appreciate that. Thank you, everybody.
Cooperation. Appreciate it. Thank you.